Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video we're going to learn the two-player game Warhammer Age of Sigmar Bladeborn, which is published by Games Workshop, who helps sponsor this video. Gather your warband and prepare for a fight, where your only protection is your drawn blade, cunning, and will to survive. Winning here is going to be a brutal struggle, but the rules don't have to be, so join me at the table and let's learn how to play. Before getting started, you'll have to assemble some models, and these are known as push-fit miniatures, which don't require any glue. We have a separate video showing you how to assemble miniatures, and I'll put a link to that in the description so you can see just how easy it is. And once you have your fighters put together, we can then dive in. To set up, you'll first need to pick which battle to play from the 12 included in the box found on these battle cards. You can shuffle and pick one randomly, or just select the one that you want to play. If this is your first battle, they recommend using drawn and quartered, which we have here, and we'll return the other battle cards back to the box. Each player will now pick the warband they'll control, which is a group of fighters with matching colored models. In this case, we have the Godsworn Hunt and Kagra's Ravagers. You'll then collect the ability card with your warband's name on it, the fighter cards matching your models, and 6 dice in their color. Each player also takes 4 of these double-sided turn tokens and specifically collects the 4 that have matching symbols on the other side, which will begin the game face up. I should also point out the game comes with additional ability and fighter cards for 4 other warbands you can pick up separately to further expand the matchups you can play. And you'll find these other warbands pictured here at the back of the rulebook. With their warband selected, you now look at the battle card for your chosen game and set the double-sided game board on the table with the matching side face up. Now put these activation, damage, desecration, and objective tokens in a nearby supply, along with these red action dice. Then check the battle card where it will use these symbols on the map to show where the objective tokens should go. We then place them with either side face up into the related spaces for them as shown on the map. Now it's time for a roll-off, which means each player takes one of these red action dice and rolls it. The player who gets the highest value wins. If you get a tie, re-roll until you don't have a tie anymore. The winner checks the reserve value of their warband's ability card and then sets that many fighters off to the side into their reserve. Then the other player does the same based on their reserve value. So we'll say the Ravagers reserved this fighter. Now players check the battle map for their starting spaces, which are the hexes showing the symbols found on their chosen turn tokens. These are the tokens claimed by the Godsworns, so their starting hexes are these 3 spaces. That makes the 3 starting spaces with these symbols the ones for the Ravagers, but don't include the red-backed spaces that show your symbol during this step. The winner of the roll-off now puts any one of their fighters that's not in their reserve onto one of their empty starting spaces. These include the ones marked on the battle card and any spaces adjacent to them. So that means we could set our fighter on any of these spots, and perhaps I'll set my first one here. Then the other player sets any one of their models into one of their starting hexes, and back and forth it goes like this until all of the available models have been placed, not counting the ones that you set aside in your reserves. Those will stay off the board for now. Just keep in mind, a fighter can never share a space with another fighter, and can never go into a space marked with a thick white outline. These are blocked hexes that no fighter can ever enter. Next, we get this deck of twist cards, which you'll shuffle, drawing and revealing one randomly, returning the rest to the box. The drawn twist card will introduce a special rule for this battle, and we'll talk more about that later. And that's the setup. Now, you might have seen some convergence and artifact cards in your box, but you won't need those for now. These allow you to play a campaign between 2 players, linking your individual battles together with your warbands earning rewards they can take into future battles, with each player fighting for the ultimate victory. But you can always play individual skirmish games like we're doing here. I'm not going to cover the rules for the campaign in this video, but you can explore them here in the rulebook when you're ready. In the skirmish game that we've set up here, players will be battling to achieve the unique objective found on the chosen battle card. We're told that at the end of each battle round, a player scores 1 point for each objective they control. And we'll discuss how you control an objective a little later. It also says that the battle ends after 3 rounds and the player with the most points at that time wins. A game is played over a series of battle rounds, and each battle round is divided into 4 phases, starting with the hero phase, where both players will roll the 6 ability dice in their color. You then group your dice into matching values. Here I have a pair of 5s, 3 4s, and a 2. Now, dice that don't match any of the other dice you rolled are known as singles. A pair is called a double, and 3 of a kind are known as triples. If you ever roll 4 or more dice that match, you must divide them into doubles or triples, but without creating any new singles. So here I could break this group into 2 doubles, but not into a triple and a single. We'll see how these groupings are used later, but for now, count up how many singles you have. The player with more singles than the other is said to have the initiative for this round. If players are tied for singles, and it's the very first round of the game, they conduct a roll-off, as we saw before, using the red action dice to determine initiative. However, if they tied for singles and it's the second battle round or later, instead of a roll-off, whichever player did not have initiative in the previous round gets the initiative in this round. And that's the hero phase. Next up, we have the reserve phase, which you always skip in the very first battle round. But it's resolved in later rounds, so let's see how it will work then. If players have 1 or more reserved fighters, they may now be put on the battlefield according to the rules shown on the battle card. Here it says any player with a reserve fighter puts one of them on or adjacent to their reserve hex, which is the space showing their player symbol on a red background. So the Godsworn's reserve space is here, and the Ravager's is over on this side. Again, you skip the reserve phase in the very first round of the game, and once a player has no more reserves left, they'll skip this phase as well. But if the other player still has reserves, they'll add a model to the board as normal. Either way, after that it's time for the combat phase. Here, players will take turns back and forth activating one of their fighters on the board. And the player with the initiative decides which player goes first. So although this player won the initiative during the hero phase, let's say they chose this player to go first. Each player will then have 4 turns during the combat phase, starting with the person going first and then going back and forth. When you take a turn, flip one of your turn counters over to help you keep track of how many you have remaining. After this turn, it means you'll still have 3 left. Then you pick any one of your fighters to activate that have not yet been activated during this combat phase. When you activate a fighter, you'll be able to perform 2 actions with it, and we'll go over the actions in a moment. Once you've finished activating a fighter, put one of these activation tokens beside it so you'll know that the next time you need to activate a fighter, you must pick a different one. Let's say it's later in the game and I only have 2 of my fighters left on the board and I'm on my 3rd turn, which means that both of these would already have been activated once. When all of your fighters on the board have been activated, you can then pick either of them to activate in a future turn. But the one that I choose will only get 1 action instead of the usual 2. On my 4th turn, I can again use either fighter, even the one I already activated twice, but again, it would only get 1 action. Okay, let's talk about the different types of actions. When a fighter can perform 2 on their turn, they can either choose the same or different ones. And there are 4 different options: move, attack, disengage, and wait. Let's learn about moving first. To move a fighter you've activated, first check the move characteristic on their fighter card shown here. This means we can move this fighter up to 4 times with 1 action. When moving, your fighter must go from the space they are in to an adjacent space, but they cannot enter a space with another fighter or blocked hexes, which again have white borders. But you can enter spaces with objective tokens. During a move action, you can go past an adjacent enemy fighter. However, if you begin your move adjacent to an enemy, then you can't take a move action. You have to stay there. Which brings us to the next type of action you can perform, disengaging. With this action, you can move away from an enemy you're adjacent to, but you must move exactly 1 space, though it can't be into a space with another fighter or a blocked hex as usual. So disengaging lets you get away from an enemy fighter, and that frees you up to perform a move action later if you really want to get somewhere else. Just note, after moving that one space to get away from an enemy, you must no longer be adjacent to any enemy fighters. Otherwise, you cannot perform that disengage action. Okay, with that covered, now let's talk about another type of action, attacking. First, you pick a weapon your fighter has to attack with. Most will only have one, which will be shown on a row in this area, but some have two weapons like Fedra here, so we'll need to pick which one we wish to use. To use a weapon, you also have to pick a target that is within range. The range of a weapon is shown here by the arrow symbol. So if we pick the top weapon, the target can be up to 4 spaces away, and if we pick the bottom weapon, the target can only be 1 space away. A range of 1 targets any one adjacent space. So let's say this model was using its range 1 weapon. It has a range to any one of these spaces. For longer ranges, just keep counting from one adjacent hex to another, changing direction as you like. So if this model was using its 4 range weapon, it would have range to all of these hexes. However, if the attacking fighter has enemy models adjacent to them, then their attack must target one of those enemies. I couldn't, in this case, for example, target this enemy. You can't attack someone further away from you when you have an enemy directly beside you. They're going to take up all of your attention. Also, if a target isn't directly adjacent to you, in addition to being within range, it must also be visible. Fighters are visible to each other if you can draw a straight, thin, imaginary line from the center of one fighter's hex to the center of the other's hex without the line entering any blocked spaces. So these two fighters have line of sight to each other, while these two fighters do not because the line goes through a blocked hex. If the line just crosses at the very edge of a blocked hex without going through it, the fighters are still visible to each other. Also note that objective spaces and other fighters don't block visibility. So these two models on the ends are still visible to each other. When you're attacking and you have a valid target that is visible and within range, it's now time to perform a roll to hit. To do this, roll a number of red action dice equal to your chosen weapon's attack characteristic, which is the value shown by the sword symbol. So in this case, we'd roll 3 dice. And let's say these are the results that we gained. You then compare the strength of the attacking weapon, which is shown by its fist symbol, against the toughness of the model you attacked, which is shown by its shield symbol on its card. If the attacker's strength is less than the target's toughness, which is the case here, only values of 5 or more are considered hits. So here, we got 1 hit. If the attacker's strength is equal to their target's toughness, which we now have in this case, 4s or higher count as hits. So in this case, we'd have 2 hits. And finally, if the attack strength is greater than their target's toughness, 3s or higher are counted as hits. So here we'd have 3 hits. And if you ever roll a 6, which is shown on this side, you've managed a critical hit. For each hit you rolled, you assign an amount of damage to your target based on the value shown by the weapon's skull symbol. Let's assume we were attacking a target that needed rolls of 5 or higher to hit. Anything that's not a critical hit is a regular hit. So we have 2 regular hits, and for each of these, you deal an amount of damage based on the value shown on the left. For critical hits, you deal the damage shown on the right. Now, for this weapon, there is no difference between the values, but if we'd been using the weapon below instead, critical hits deal more damage. In this case, though, with 2 regular hits and 1 critical hit, we've dealt a total of 9 damage. Anytime you deal damage to a fighter, assign that value in damage tokens to it, setting them onto its card. If a fighter ever has damage equal to or greater than their wound characteristic, which is shown here, then the fighter has been taken down and is removed from the battle. A removed fighter will not be brought back into the battle for the rest of the game. And that's how you attack, which leaves us with one more possible type of action you can take on your turn, called waiting. When you take this action, your fighter's turn just ends. This is an action you normally only take if you have to activate a fighter, but don't really have anything you want to do with it. Or if you want to take just one action, but not the second. Well, the second would be waiting, which is basically doing nothing. And those are all of the actions. However, you'll also want to check your fighter for any special abilities they might have. For example, this fighter adds 1 to its weapon's strength characteristic if 1 or more friendly fighters are adjacent to the target of its attack. Now, in addition to specific characters having their own abilities, your warband has abilities that it can take advantage of listed on its ability card. There are several here, and when a player activates one of their fighters, they can use a single ability from here, either before their first action, after their first action, or after their second action. To perform an ability, the fighter must be able to pay for it, and each ability will have a certain number of rune marks shown on its left. And the fighter that wants to use an ability must have all of them on their card, either here or here. So Thedra could perform any of these abilities, but not the ones showing these symbols, because she doesn't have them. Once you qualify to use an ability, you then pay the ability cost shown in bold at the start, which is either going to be a double or a triple. This means that you have to discard that type of ability dice grouping from the ones you have. For example, if I wanted to perform the hunting pack ability, I would need to have a double I could discard. Now, anytime that you have to pay for a double, you can instead pay for it with a triple, but you must discard all 3 of the dice. Any ability dice that you discard cannot be used for the rest of the current battle round, so just set them off to the side for now. With the cost paid, you then resolve the ability as printed here. Now, we're not going to go through each ability in this video as their effects are described on them, but we will talk about a couple of keywords quickly that you'll want to understand. Sometimes an effect will say to use the value of this ability. The value is the numbers showing on the dice you're using to pay for this ability. So in this case, if we used this double, the value we would have is 4. Sometimes an effect, like this one, will tell you to push a fighter, and if so, you get to move that fighter into any adjacent hex, but of course not into a space with another fighter or a blocked hex. Some abilities will provide a fighter with a bonus action, and a bonus action does not count against the normal number of actions that a fighter could take during their activation. Other abilities may let you perform a reroll of the action dice, and that means you pick up all of the ones you just rolled and roll them again, unless the effect says that you can reroll fewer of them. However, you can never reroll the dice more than once. So if a second effect would let me reroll again, I just ignore it. Now, before moving on, I should also draw attention to your twist card. This was put into play during the setup, and the rule printed on it is in effect anytime it applies. So keep this in mind while playing. And that's everything you need to know to activate a fighter. And once a player is finished performing the actions they've chosen for their fighter, including any ability they wish to take, the next player takes a turn activating one of their fighters. And back and forth it continues like this until they've each taken 4 turns. And at that time, their turn markers will all be face down. And that ends the combat phase. And then you move to the end phase. Here you remove all of the activation tokens from off of the battlefield, and you also flip all of the turn counters back over so that it looks like this when you're done. At this point, you would now start a new battle round unless your battle card has a special rule. Here it tells us that at the end of the battle round, each player now scores 1 victory point for each objective they control. You check for control of an objective at the end of each player's activations during the battle phase, and at that time, if either player has more of its fighters within 1 hex of an objective, they gain control of it, placing a control token on it with their symbol face up. Now, in this case, there's a tie between the 2 factions on this objective, so nothing happens. But let's say this model moved into here during its activation. Now there are 2 Godsworn fighters to this one Kagra's fighter, so the Godsworn have gained control. And this objective will remain under their control until another player gains control of it at the end of a future turn by having more of their fighters within 1 space of it. So that means, for example, this fighter could move away and control wouldn't change because this other faction has not taken control of it. There's still a tie between the fighters. If, however, this fighter ended up here at the end of an activation, now control would change and we would flip this token over. As we saw for this battle, at the end of each battle round, players count how many objectives they control at that moment and score a point for each one, which they can record on a piece of paper. Players would then begin a new round. As it says here, at the end of scoring the third battle round, the game ends, and the player with the most points wins. And in the case of a tie, the match is a draw. And those are all of the rules, but be sure to check the back of the rulebook for this handy player reference, as this summarizes pretty much everything we discussed here and can be really useful when you're first playing. You'll also find this book included in your box, and this will provide you with all the information necessary to use the fighters from Bladeborn in a game of Warcry. Warcry is a game that uses many of the same rules as Bladeborn, but introduces 3D terrain for you to fight on and a variety of new warbands and ways to play. For that game, all you need is the Warcry rulebook, which you can pick up separately. But otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play Warhammer Age of Sigmar Bladeborn. If you have any questions about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get a notification anytime we post a new video. But until next time, thanks for watching.